welcome to our special coverage of the German federal elections. My name is Benis Abubedu. Germans are choosing between a 12-year-old reign of its current Chancellor Angela Merkel and about 6 other candidates. Like the case in Ghana, there are only 2 main contenders in the race, irrespective of the number of parties represented in the contest. Angela Merkel for the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, and her main headache, Martin Schulz, leader of the Social Democratic Party, SPD. Key in the German race is the high potential for the leftist party Alternative, that's Alternative for Germany, to get into the German parliament, also known as the Bundestag. The small party, being led by lesbian mother Alice Weidel, is anti-immigrant and Eurosceptic. Many, especially Ghanaians and African immigrants in general, are said to harbor fears about the AfD's entry into the Bundestag, as the nationalistic party may represent a threat to their presence in Germany. Today, Joe News brings you exclusive coverage live from Germany as they go to the polls. Well, they've already begun voting since morning, and with 2 hours ahead of Ghana, we will have information about the results in due course. We'll see reports from Latif Idris and Joe News editor Araba Kumsin, and bring you interviews with the leading candidates in the German elections, including incumbent Angela Merkel. We'll also hear from Ghanaians in Germany and Germans in Ghana. We'll get some analysis from international relations experts, as well as a playback of analysis from political correspondents of the DW on the main issues which dominated the campaign, before we cross over to the DW studio in Germany at 6:30. Editors Firm will be on with analysis of major events during the week, but of course with some analysis on German-Ghana relations. We'd love to hear from you, so post your thoughts on Joy News on our various platforms, Joy News on TV on Facebook, and Joy News on TV on Twitter. You can also send us your thoughts about the elections on the number 0266 547 857, 0266 547 857. Make sure to add your name and where you're messaging us from. My name is Benis Abubedu. Do stay. Thank you for staying here on Joy News. German Chancellor and incumbent in the German elections, Angela Merkel, has been speaking with her partner DW. She speaks about a possible German mediation between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Now, the two have threatened each other with nuclear prowess. Angela Merkel also addressed the very burdening issue of migration, saying that although 100,000 asylum requests are yet to be processed, a new proposal being referred to as the immigration law will ensure migrants are integrated into the German community, and there'll also be balance to ensure immigrants are not competing to the disadvantage of German nationals in both jobs and benefits. The Alternative for Germany, led by lesbian mother Alice Weidel, also attracted her attention. She's been speaking with Ines Paul and Jafar Abdul Karim of DW, our partners.
Angela Merkel has been German Chancellor for 12 years and is running for office for the 4th time. Ms. Merkel, we're delighted to have the chance to speak to you here at the Chancellor in Berlin, the German capital.
I'm pleased too. Welcome.
Hello, Madam Chancellor.
Almost the entire world knows your face and your name. In these uncertain times of terror and war and collapsing alliances, many people are afraid of the future and place great expectations in you. People often ask us what you are actually afraid of.
I don't think fear is a good advisor. We must face our challenges head on, and we face huge tasks. Then we can consider what to do. In my experience, when the world works together, we can move mountains. When everyone has different opinions, it can take a really long time to reach a solution at all. But we negotiate, talk, and find one.
Is there anything that keeps you from sleeping at night?
Well, there are situations to which I have to devote a lot of thought, such as now when I think about the question of Ukraine and Russia, when I think about the Syrian civil war, which has robbed so many millions of their homes, or when I think about the nuclear tests by the North Korean dictator. That naturally worries me too. But rather than fearing these problems, I consider how I can solve them.
Ms. Merkel, you have been in office for 12 years. Doesn't an unlimited number of terms in office harm pluralism in society, and with that, democracy?
I don't think so. There are different systems. There are direct election systems where there are usually term limits, for example, the French and American presidential elections. In Germany, we elect parties, and you can't limit the number of terms for parties. And those parties then select their own top candidates, which is why the number of terms in office is not limited. So in Germany, for example, the number of terms of office is limited for the president, Germany's head of state, but not for the chancellor.
So if I understand you correctly, you are opposed to limiting the period in office for a chancellor to 2 terms.
As we already said, you have been Chancellor for 12 years and have attended many UN General Assemblies. What do you think when you hear US President Donald Trump threatening North Korea with total destruction in the event of an attack?
I am against threats of this kind. And speaking for myself and the government, I must say that we consider any type of military solution absolutely inappropriate, and we are counting on diplomatic efforts. This must be vigorously implemented. In my sanctions and enforcing these sanctions are the right answer. But anything with regard to North Korea, I think, is wrong. And that is why we clearly disagree with the US president.
Did you get to talk to him after his speech?
I haven't talked with him since then. I did speak with him before his speech a few days ago. I also made it clear during our phone conversation that a diplomatic solution needs to be found.
Are you offering to act as a mediator?
I made it clear that Germany is prepared to assume responsibility, alone or as part of the European Union. Even if this conflict is far away from Germany, it is one that also affects us. That is why I am prepared, as is the foreign minister, to assume responsibility here. We took part in negotiating the Iran agreement, which I think is good, and better than having no agreement at all. It took many years, but in the end, it did limit Iran's possibilities for nuclear armament. And I think we must take the same path, or a similar one, with Russia, with China, together with the US. Also in the case of North Korea.
So would you also ring Kim Jong-un?
That's not on the agenda now. I also do not intend to take steps which haven't been agreed upon. That would weaken the international community of states. But we can't just avoid taking responsibility either.
Ms. Merkel, staying with foreign policy, I understand, of course, that you have to speak to governments who do not necessarily correspond to the level of democracy we have here. But Egypt, for example, you signed a security agreement with Egypt, and according to Human Rights Watch, the Interior Ministry with whom you signed this agreement has itself been accused of using torture.
We talk with every country. Along with the agreements we sign with them, we also talk about things that bother us. With Egypt, for example, we've had long and in part very controversial discussions about our employees from political foundations. We talk about human rights abuses and situations that contravene the rule of law. Yet, on one hand, foreign policy is always about looking after our interests, and on the other, about safeguarding our values. And there are many reasons to help Egypt become a stable country, a country that enjoys reasonable economic development. So there are reasons for us to sign a joint agreement.
But it's also a country that restricts press freedom and suppresses the opposition. We, from DW, for example, are censored there.
As I've already stated, we know about this from political foundations, and now, for example, from you, from Deutsche Welle. And there we clearly tell President El-Sisi that we criticize that we don't think it's right. But not to talk to them because everything isn't just as we would wish it, or to say we won't negotiate at all with Egypt, I think that's the wrong approach, because Egypt needs our support, and through dialogue, we can perhaps take small steps towards improvement.
A major issue that our international audience also associates you with is the refugee one. The central question there is always, how long can refugees stay in Germany? What is your plan there?
The protected status of refugees varies. On the one hand, we have refugees who have been granted the full status defined by the Convention on Refugees. They're initially allowed to stay here for 3 years. And if after 3 years the situation in their homeland hasn't improved, they can get permanent residency status. Then there are refugees with subsidiary protection status. There we look at the situation in their homeland on a yearly basis and decide accordingly. So it's dependent on their protected status. We have people who return home voluntarily, such as to Iraq. When cities there have been liberated from IS, people also return. And we support these voluntary returnees because we want to give the people there a reasonable chance to start over again.
What if the war in Syria lasts for 20 years? What will we do then? If a family lives here, grew up here, the kids go to school and parents work.
Well, as I said, those who have the full status defined by the Convention on Refugees will, after a certain time, get permanent residency status. With people who are earning a living and supporting themselves, we could review their cases. However, let's hope the Syrian conflict won't last 20 years. But given the situation in Syria, the people who are here at the moment have no reason to fear being sent back.
I have visited many refugee facilities in Germany and spoken with the people in their own language. Many refugees are becoming frustrated. Right now, they feel abandoned. What precisely do you want to do?
It took a long time to process so many applications. That was a problem. But the good news is we're now down to only 100,000 unprocessed applications, and hundreds of thousands have already been given a decision one way or the other. Many people don't realize refugees first have to take a German course before they can start school or job training. And that takes time. But we do our utmost to get young people into education. And even those without a full residence permit can work or learn a trade. Nevertheless, many see German bureaucracy as being very slow and would like to be able to enter the labor market much faster. But we cannot allow that either, because we cannot allow destructive competition, that perhaps Germans who are seeking employment cannot find certain jobs. We have to keep on finding a balance there. Germany is an orderly country, but that means things may take a little longer, and I can only ask for patience.
I'd like to focus on another group that has been living in Germany for a long time, people of Turkish origin. We keep hearing that many of them still feel the question as to where they actually belong hasn't been answered. Could this perhaps also be due to the fact that your party still doesn't accept that Germany is an immigration country?
We have long since said goodbye to the times when we called these people guest workers. Everyone is able to acquire German citizenship. That means people with Turkish roots can become just as German as those whose families may have lived here for centuries. I always tell people who've been here a long time, but might not have German citizenship, that they have contributed to the prosperity of our country and therefore belong here, if they obey the law, of course. What worries us is the fact that different groups from Turkey are maybe spying on or surveilling each other. We do not want that. We don't want to import any conflicts from Turkey to Germany. We will make sure that all groups can live here peacefully and unharmed.
How exactly do you want to do that, or make sure that precisely that doesn't happen?
By investigating every case, by really encouraging people who feel they are being watched to inform us, and then taking decisive action against the respective sources or those doing that.
Almost all of your coalition partners want a real immigration law. I'm not talking about the law regulating the immigration of skilled workers, but about a real immigration law. Is that something you are willing to negotiate on?
I believe that our proposed law on skilled workers is exactly what others might describe as an immigration law. We say that our country needs to bring in skilled workers. We have a shortage of specialists, and the European Union's Blue Card scheme offers us very good options for immigration, especially for high earners with academic degrees. We'd like to improve this and extend it to simple occupations. But these need to be linked to the existence of a real job that cannot be filled any other way. And I think that is the right thing to do, because we do not want immigrants to end up in our welfare system.
So it is non-negotiable for you?
The details have to be negotiated. We know, for example, that Canada has long preferred a point-based system, but is now also looking at the question, what jobs do we actually want to fill? It needs to be said that immigration laws are always aimed to serve the needs of the country into which people come. By contrast, asylum law, the Refugee Convention, is a humanitarian obligation that is not tied to a workplace. And these are two separate issues. And that is why we've made our position clear by naming it the law regulating the immigration of skilled workers.
Zuwanderung von Fachkräften, die in Deutschland gesucht werden.
Madam Chancellor, Germany is voting this Sunday. According to current polls, the AfD could become the third strongest party in the Bundestag. Why haven't you been able to prevent this?
I do not wish to speculate about the outcome of the election, as you can understand, but I will call on as many people as possible to support what we in the CDU and CSU are offering with their votes. Our two parties have had certain disagreements, especially about the euro and its stabilization, also on refugee policy. I believe these were fundamental decisions for Europe, for the single currency, and for our humanitarian commitments. They've naturally also provoked discussions throughout society, some of them heated. But I think these decisions were both correct and necessary. And that is why we must try to solve the problems that are connected to it, to earn people's trust and let them know that every vote counts. But in certain situations, fundamental decisions like these have to be made.
DW is Germany's international broadcaster. Many people keep asking us, Germany is so well off. You have good schools, you have decent health care, and a good retirement program. Yet, despite all this, the AfD, this populist right-wing party, is so successful. Can you try to explain this to our international viewers?
I don't want to explain this because I will never work with the AfD. But I just want to say that there are indeed people in Germany who have problems. This does not justify certain political attitudes or exclusion. But we must also work very hard to ensure that we have equal living conditions. We have rural areas where internet access is slow to arrive, in which there is a shortage of doctors. We have people who've worked for many years and still have a very small pension. And that is why, even though our country ranks highly by international standards, here too, many people have to struggle to make ends meet.
Right. Another question about the AfD. According to polls, some voters who up to now have voted for the CDU or CSU are migrating to the AfD. Do you have an idea on how to win these voters back?
We are not the only ones affected by this phenomenon. My answer is clear: to solve people's problems. The worries they have, having their own jobs, as well as decent schools and doctors, to really take care of these issues. but on the other hand, to signal a clear stop to hatred and violence.
Ms. Merkel, thank you very much. To finish, we always like to ask the same question. Imagine you had to spend 1 month on a desert island and could only survive if you took one of these people with you, one of the other party lead candidates.
And you need to choose one of these people or you won't survive.
I take Joachim Herrmann, CDU and CSU.
For our international audience, Joachim Herrmann is the partner to Chancellor Merkel's CDU. What would you discuss with him on the desert island?
I would discuss with him how we can improve internal security in Germany. And perhaps he would ask me a few policy issues that he hasn't dealt with yet.
Super.
Thank you very much, Ms. Merkel.
You're welcome.
We always finish with a quick selfie. Would you?
Sure.
Could you pass me the mobile phone, please?
Dankeschön.
Da kommt er macht das Selfie, wenn das in Ordnung ist. A quick selfie there with Angela Merkel, not a bad idea. But that was the CDU's candidate for chancellorship in today's election, Angela Merkel. She happens to be the incumbent, and she's also been the chancellor for 3 consecutive terms. That's 12 years, and she hopes to win this election and earn another term. She's been speaking to Ines Paul and Jafar Abdul Karim with DW, our partners. But Joy News is also in Germany, and Latif Idris, as well as Joy News editor Araba Kumsin, are there for us. They'll be bringing us some interviews live from Germany.
Various polling stations across the country. Here at Gonchole Primary School, which has been converted into a polling center, it is expected that about 2,700 voters come here to vote. We are here, Joy News, in collaboration with Deutsche Welle Television, and we've been speaking to some of the voters, and they've been telling us what informed their decisions to go for a particular political party, and also those vying for the local parliamentary positions as well.
Well, do expect more from Latif and Joy News editor Araba Kumsin. But leader of the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, and main contender for incumbent Angela Merkel, well, he's also been speaking to Ines Paul and Jafar Abdul Karim, who are with our partners at DW TV.
Martin Schulz is the SPD's lead candidate and Chancellor Angela Merkel's main challenger. Mr. Schulz, we're glad to be able to talk to you today here in Freiburg, southern Germany.
Welcome, Mr. Schulz.
Mr. Schulz, relations between Turkey and Germany are increasingly worsening. Which policies regarding Turkey could we expect to see if you were Chancellor?
A policy that values Turkey as a close ally, a friendly nation, but which also takes into account the fact that almost half of the population is opposed to Erdogan, as we saw in the recent referendum. On the other hand, I would not allow Germany to continue to be provoked by Erdogan. I, for one, am not willing to remain silent about how Erdogan is destroying democracy in Turkey just because of the refugee issue. I have said, and I will say again, that due to the way the Turkish government is currently behaving, Turkey cannot become an EU member. If that leads to us cancelling the refugee agreement, then we will have to live with that, and we will have to take care of the refugees. But I'm not prepared to get down on my knees in front of Erdogan. We cannot allow ourselves to be blackmailed. And I say once again, the way I know him, he won't be tempted to instrumentalize the refugees for his foreign policy. I think if he did that, he would lose all international credibility.
dann verliert meiner Meinung nach jede internationale Glaubwürdigkeit.
Mr. Schulz, you say we have to deal with it. What would that mean exactly? Let us assume millions more really do come to Europe and Germany. What then? But we have to consider all scenarios. You say we need to deal with it. Does that mean you would favor limiting the number of refugees?
No. Firstly, most of the refugees who reached Turkey stayed there. Only a small minority of them moved on. It was a high number, but it was only a fraction of the total. 2 million refugees remained in Turkey. They won't all come to Europe at once. Many of them want to go back home, and we have a vested interest in seeing peace return to Syria. Limiting their numbers is not the solution. The European Union needs a cohesive refugee policy. That's the solution. The problem is not that we cannot accommodate the refugees. The problem is that a lot of EU member states refuse to take them in and say that Germany needs to deal with the issue itself. That's why I always say, were the 890,000 people who came to Germany in 2015 to be dispersed among the 508 million inhabitants of the bloc's 28 countries, there would be no problem. The refugees are not the problem. The problem is the lack of solidarity from the countries refusing to take them.
Let me dig a little deeper here. What does that mean exactly when it comes to dealing with countries like Poland or Hungary that refuse to accept refugee quotas? As Chancellor, how would you handle Poland and Hungary?
Hungary is questioning the EU in principle. The EU is a legal community, and Hungary is not prepared to implement existing European law according to the supreme rulings of the European Court. That openly questions the EU as a community, and that is why, in return, we must say that, as of next year, we will negotiate the next financial period of the EU.
What can Hungary expect from you as Chancellor if it doesn't stick to the refugee quota?
That we will make some adjustments to the EU budget, that the countries taking in refugees get the financial support they need.
But would you manage it by getting everyone on board? Right now, Germany stands alone on the refugee issue.
Yes, it does, and that needs to change. Germany cannot remain isolated. This is a matter that Europe as a whole has to address. Right now, the budgetary framework is 907 billion euros, and the biggest contributor is Germany. So we need to say, you're getting billions for infrastructure, economic development and agriculture, but you're not taking in a single refugee. So we need to agree on a fair distribution of refugees and fair financial support for taking them in. Poland and a few other countries are willing to go along with sanctions against Russia because they feel threatened by Russia. That's solidarity. When it's about long-term economic development, solidarity, no problem. Sanctions, sure. If it's billions, it's yes, please. But refugees, no thank you. The Chancellor must be able to say no. The principle of solidarity underpins funding, sanctions, but also the refugee issue.
Well, on German-Africa relations, Martin Schulz is proposing stringent laws which he says are currently non-existent in Germany to regulate who travels there and how.
Mr. Schulz, DW is an international broadcaster. Our viewers want to know what a Chancellor Schulz would stand for. For example, when it comes to migration partnerships.
What do you mean?
How do we deal with countries like Niger, Ethiopia, Senegal, Egypt, Libya? What deals or agreements would you make with these countries?
I prefer the term agreement to deal. There are two issues here. We're seeing a massive wave of refugees leaving Africa and trying to reach Europe. Consequently, people smuggling has become an industry. We need to put a stop to it. For that, we need a migration law for Germany and Europe. Migration to Europe is not a crime. Applying for asylum should not be the only option for people who want to migrate to Europe. We need a migration law like the US, Canada, Australia, like the main immigration countries, so people can apply to immigrate. There's no guarantee it will be approved, but there needs to be an option. European countries need quotas, with individual countries saying how many immigrants they can take in. That's a completely pragmatic step we've been talking about for 22 years. I was a member of the European Parliament when we first started discussing it. We need a migration law and a process for people applying to immigrate via embassies and consulates.
But you know, when you refer to this exact issue that...
Let me finish my thought. Okay, you want to gallop through highly complex issues in 27 minutes. We could do that. But then you'd have to accept that I can't give you the answers your viewers want to hear. You can't rush through these issues. We need a migration law. Alongside that, we have a guaranteed right to asylum law. Now, let me answer your question. In order to stop human traffickers, we must, if need be, work together with countries like Niger or others. That is only possible under the supervision of international organizations, because constitutional norms must be adhered to, and there is at least a risk of some nations not being able to follow international legal norms. Sorry.
First of all, you say there should be legal immigration to Germany, and they should visit the embassy. You know how complex that is. If that were possible, not many migrants would come to Germany illegally. What do you mean exactly? Suddenly thousands would be outside the embassy in Libya, for example, wanting to come to Germany. Is what you are saying feasible?
Is it feasible to abandon these thousands of refugees to people smugglers?
Is it feasible to say, besides the fact that the new agreement is causing a lot of human rights violations, if we refer to Niger, for example, you already know what Doctors Without Borders or Amnesty International have said. They say human rights violations occur there every day, and they also say now is a dark time for the EU when it is making agreements with dictators. Have we reached the point that the EU has to work with dictators to relocate borders?
No.
But that's what's happening right now.
As I told your colleague, if we work together with these countries, we have to do so under the aegis of international organizations, the UN, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or EU bodies. So that normal constitutional principles are upheld which these countries either can't uphold or don't want to uphold. But we don't have migration law. That's a big deficit. So the alternative is what we're seeing happen right now. We're not working together with these countries. They're not interested in working with us. And those that profit are the traffickers who round up these people, stick them in boats, take all their worldly possessions, lead them out to sea, and send thousands of them to their deaths. The smugglers need to be tackled, and doing so might mean working together with these countries. But using structures that we control, not them. But that's not a long-term solution. So to return to my point, we need to establish a migration law for Europe.
I'd like to address another issue. Mr. Schulz, the world is following Germany with greater intensity than we've seen in a while, especially in the run-up to the election. Our viewers keep saying how astonished they are that a right-wing populist and nationalist party like the AfD can become so popular in a country where so many people are so well off. My question is, how do you explain why so many Germans are so angry at Germany?
So viele deutsche Bürgerinnen und Bürger auf Deutschland haben.
Wenn ich darauf eine in sich geschlossene Antwort
I wish I had a simple answer for that.
glücklich.
You have to look at this situation on several levels. There are a number of reasons for these developments. The Federal Republic of Germany is a perfectly normal European country, and our society is no different from any other. We've seen these phenomena in other countries. Take the G7 states, for example, including the UK, France, Italy, and Germany. They also have citizens who are frustrated, and those people have joined political movements. We live in a globalized world where everything has been turned on its head. Due to digitization, we are experiencing major changes that frighten many people, and at the same time we are experiencing how politicians lack the courage to tell the people that things won't be the same tomorrow as they are today, and today isn't the same as yesterday. We're experiencing rapid changes, and that is why we must proceed with courage. That courage also means telling the people exactly that, and that is what I'm accusing Angela Merkel of. Angela Merkel manages Germany's status quo according to the motto, a country in which we live well and enjoy living in. She is right. We do live well and enjoy living in this country. But we also want life to be good tomorrow. And that is why we need to tell the people which course we are taking and where politics are headed. This implies that everything's fine. The government has everything under control. And when people find out that this is not the case, a lot of them get upset, particularly those in the middle class.
Look
at the people in Britain who voted for Brexit, or the Lega Nord and the Grillo movement in Italy, or the Front National in France. This anger is, in principle, nothing more than a rejection of the fact that the world is going through dramatic changes.
Verweigerungshaltung zu akzeptieren, dass die Welt in einem dramatischen Umbruch ist.
What would you do differently to Angela Merkel?
I'll give you a practical example. We've talked a lot about the refugee crisis. By taking in the refugees, Germany is fulfilling a huge humanitarian commitment, and we should be proud of that. I personally would have gone on TV and told people why we were doing this and how we're going to do it. And I'd have asked them to help. But Mrs. Merkel said only, we can do this. It was left to other people, and they weren't given the means to do the job. When you're the leader of a country, you have certain obligations, and one of those is to tell the people what's going on. But sometimes that means telling them things they won't want to hear.
What would a Chancellor, Martin Schulz, have said about the refugee crisis?
I would say this is just the start of something that we will be dealing with for the next 10 to 15 years. This is an epochal challenge. Migration will continue. Germany is the EU's largest country, so we must lead the way. All Europeans must take part, not just us and Italy and Greece and Cyprus. That will help us to fulfill our humanitarian obligations without placing the burden on just a few countries. If we demonstrate solidarity, we can make this work. But it hasn't happened so far. It will take some time, but I promise you I will work hard on this. That's what I would have told the German people.
In an interview with Spiegel magazine, you said, I must try to be honest.
You'll have noticed in the course of the conversation, I'm always honest.
If you want to take an honest look at the past months, when you were voted party leader, the polls put you in a strong position, but now things look very different. When you are putting on a brave face, how do you really feel?
Fine.
Really?
Sure.
From a personal point of view, doesn't it hurt when the polls show you to be right at the top, and then you keep on falling deeper and deeper?
No, sorry, I'll have to disappoint you there. When I open the morning paper and the polls are favorable, I am happy. If I open the paper and the polls are bad, I'm not happy. But throughout my life, I have had my share of ups and downs. My inner equilibrium tells me polls are just polls. The people will speak on September the 24th. And then we'll see. Do you know what happens if you allow yourself to be guided by opinion polls? You abandon principles and give in to popular opinion. I don't do that.
We have one final question for you. Just imagine you had to spend 1 month on a desert island and could only survive by taking one of the other leading candidates with you. You have no choice. You have to take one of them or you won't survive.
I can't see them all. I have to take one of them with me?
You have to decide.
3, 2, 1.
Özdemir. I know him best of all. We were colleagues at the European Parliament. I also know Ms. Wagenknecht. She was also there with me. Cem Özdemir is a fine man, a really decent guy.
Mr. Schulz, we always finish with a selfie. Would you mind?
Ein Selfie schaffen wir noch. Das war, ja, ging schnell vorbei, den Cem Özdemir dabei.
Wir sind alle dabei und ein Lächeln.
So that was Ines Paul and Jafar Abdul Karim of DWTV, our partners, speaking to main contender in today's election for Chancellor of Germany, Martin Schulz. But let's go to Berlin now, where Latif Idris is standing by. Hello, Latif. Hello, Latif, can you hear me? Well, we seem to have some trouble there getting Latif, but we will establish a better feed and get his feed back on what is happening with the German elections now. And but meanwhile, in the build-up to this, we've been speaking to political correspondent with DWTV, Thomas Sparrow, especially on the, many significant issues that have come up during the campaign. Talk about the diesel scandal and also about very key one there, migrant issue. First, let's hear him on the governance system in Germany and how the Dieselgate affected the politics of the day.
Well, the final phase of the campaign has started. In fact, the most important phase, the election, is in just over a month, on September 24th. And if we look at the recent polls, we can see that Angela Merkel's party, the Conservative Bloc, CDU, CSU, is clearly ahead of the Social Democrats, the candidate of the Social Democrats being Martin Schulz. The Conservatives have around 39% of voting intention, whereas the Social Democrats are on 24%. And when people were asked whether they wanted a change of government, a majority said that they still wanted the Conservative Bloc, Angela Merkel's party, to lead the next government. The big question, however, is what happens with the other parties that are fighting for this campaign. We have 3 parties on 8%. That's the Populist Alternative for Germany, the Liberal FDP and the Greens. And these smaller parties are particularly important because in Germany you don't have a system where, like in the United States, the winner takes it all. Here in Germany, after the elections, parties have to sit down and try to form coalitions, and it is there where it will be important to see which party forms a coalition with which party after the September 24 elections. So from that perspective, although we can see that Angela Merkel's party is clearly ahead, we can't say now for sure what the next government will look like.
Well, there've also been major issues within the automobile industry, for example, and that has had an impact. Give us a brief background to the Dieselgate scandal and the response that it has attracted even in this political season.
It has indeed been one of the biggest topics of the summer. In fact, before the summer, it was also a big topic. A few days ago, we had a diesel summit here in Berlin where politicians and car bosses agreed to upgrade the software of around 5 million diesel cars. Many people here are still concerned that this may not be enough, and just to give you a context, this is a particularly important topic here in Germany, not only because the automobile industry in Germany is absolutely vital. It gives hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it's also recognized worldwide, but also because Germany is a country with very high environmental standards, and there's a lot of concern about the possible pollution caused by these diesel cars. But as you say, the Dieselgate scandal, as it has been called, has had a political impact. In fact, many people believe politicians have been too lenient towards the auto industry. A lot of people think that this could have long-term effects on the German economy, and many people also say, and this was perhaps surprising when we found out this poll, that many people believe that politicians put the interests of the auto industry above, for example, public health or environmental concerns. And this was something that was reflected in the personal approval ratings of various politicians here in Germany. Among others, obviously, Angela Merkel. She had a 10 percentage point drop in her personal approval ratings. And according to analysts, according to the people who also conducted the poll, this might have to do with the fact that she was not so present during this Dieselgate scandal, in particular during this diesel summit a few days ago. Many people criticizing that she was on holiday and that she has preferred to have a sort of low-key approach to politics. Other politicians in Germany also suffered in their personal approval ratings, and many people say that in their cases it also has to do with this Dieselgate scandal.
Let's look at the last time what we spoke about. You did mention that the more internationally oriented the issue is, the more advantage there is for the incumbent Angela Merkel, whose campaign has also commented on the racial controversy in the United States. That issue is quite big. How has that been used by both sides in the last minute of their campaigns?
It is indeed a big topic, and it's also a topic that politicians, not only Angela Merkel or Martin Schulz, but other politicians obviously commented on, rejecting far-right violence and extremism, saying that those things have to be fought irrespective of the place, irrespective of the country. Germany has also had big problems in that respect. But if we look at the United States as in general, you can see that the United States has played a very important role in this campaign, not only because of the relationship between Donald Trump and Angela Merkel, but also because of the content, because of the topics that are being discussed. One very important topic, for example, in Germany is defense spending. Germany has committed to try and reach until 2024 that 2% of the GDP in defense spending for NATO. That's something that, for example, Donald Trump has put a lot of pressure on for allies of the US to try and increase their military expenditures. But, for example, the Social Democrats have criticized that. They're saying that basically that means that Angela Merkel is subordinating herself to Donald Trump, and that instead of arming Germany, instead of increasing military expenditures like Donald Trump is requesting, they would, for example, put that money on education or health or social care. So this has become indeed a very important topic in recent days, this aspect of the military expenditure, but also everything that has to do with the United States as well.
Interesting. Finally, before I let you go, it's interesting how politicians, take the issues and play around it to suit them. What has been the strategies for these two main contenders going forward, even as you near the day for the election in Germany?
Angela Merkel is obviously trying to present trying to defend her record as Chancellor, but she has also, in a way, tried to avoid any big controversy that could affect, for example, that comfortable lead that she has in the polls. She wants to keep those issues as low as possible without creating any trouble, without causing that, for example, some of the voters of the other parties will say, well, now we have to really rally and try and go to the polls. They want to try and keep it rather low, but obviously trying to focus on the topics that are important to the Conservatives, and also, as we spoke about last week, focusing on these international aspects where she obviously has the advantage of being the leader of Germany and being able to talk with all the international leaders as well. On the other hand, Martin Schulz obviously understands that he has to attack, that he has to present his ideas. We've seen plenty of press conferences in recent days, television interviews where he has tried to present his proposals and his ideas, where he has tried to grab as many headlines as he can, because his main goal is obviously to try and reduce the gap between the Conservative bloc and the Social Democrats.
Gifty Andro-Appiah speaking to DW political correspondent Thomas Sparrow there on some of the key issues that dominated the campaign period prior to today's elections in Germany. Let's go now live to Berlin. My colleague Latif Idris is coming to us. Hello, Latif.
Hello, Bennett.
How's the weather? It must be really cold.
Yeah, it is really cold. It's been cold for the past few days, but today the weather is kind of friendly to us, those of us who have not used to the cold weather, if you like.
Yeah, sure. But let's talk about what you're picking up on the ground so far. How are the elections, or how is the elections going?
Yeah, the elections started pretty cold this morning. We've been to a couple of polling stations, and voting started very early on time. The two polling stations we visited, one had a lot of people coming in at that time. The second one we visited, the place was a bit calmer. That was at Wedding, some part of Berlin. That is a working class community. That place had people trickling in slowly, but the first port of call was quite busy at the time we visited, with a lot of people coming in at the time. And it was expected because the number of people expected to vote at this particular polling station was much higher than where we visited on the second time, Bennett.
And Latif, we know what the polls are saying is in Angela Merkel's favor, but you've been speaking to some Germans who are also voting today. What are you picking on the streets?
Exactly what you had the interviewer in studio telling you, Bernice. A lot of people we've spoken to have the belief that Angela Merkel's party is going to come up tops. And now the concern most people are raising has to do with the kind of coalition Germany is looking at, whether it's going to be a coalition between the far right or what we still have in the system. And that is the concern most people have been raising here in Germany. The far right view isn't very well selling. People here on the ground are not buying the message of the far right. They think it's an extreme party, and they do not share in most of the campaign messages the party has been selling over the last couple of months ahead of today's polls.
And Latif, one of the key issues, prior to today's election has to do with refugees and migrants. And we know that there's a pretty large Ghanaian community in Germany. What have they been telling you also?
Yeah, the Ghanaian community, yesterday we caught up with a number of them, and they believe that they come here to do business. They are not here to harm any individual. The migrant issue, the far right, that is one of the key issues they've been raising over the campaign period, that Chancellor Merkel has opened Germany's border to migrants who are coming in, and the fear they are raising is that these people are going to come up as terrorists attacking Germans and affecting the culture of Germany, reason why they've raised strict opposition towards the Chancellor's move to accept migrants into the country. We have some Ghanaians who are also here. They've been in the country for quite a number of years, and they believe that the position of the far-right party is a threat to their very existence in Germany. We'll come back on that later on. I'm not here alone. I'm here with Araba Kumsin, our own editor, and I would like to also find out from her what she's gone through the processes from yesterday, today. Can you tell us what you make of the process so far?
Well, Latif, what struck me really was the fact that, there's very little fuss and tension about the elections as we witness in our own countries, there's so much tension in the run-up to the election and even after when the votes are being counted. But here, it's like an ordinary, everyday thing people do. You go, you cast your vote, and you go about your ordinary business, and you wait until the votes are cast. So it's quite interesting and a lot of lessons to be learned from this process.
And you had an interview earlier at one of the polling stations with one of the far-right, party members. She had some interesting thoughts. What do you make of the position of the far-right party?
Well, they have an innate fear that they are losing their Christian values, they are losing their identity. Germany, and when I say they, I'm referring to Germany. Germany is losing its identity, it's losing its values because all these migrants and refugees, particularly from the Muslim countries, are flooding their country and taking over their identity. So they feel that they need to recapture their identity, and that's the tangent they appear to go on. And speaking to a few Germans, they agree that indeed they ought to preserve their culture, but not by pushing away migrants. But we just need to look at that policy very well, and yeah.
So we'll come back to Araba briefly, but one of the key issues that we've identified here also has to do with the fact that we have migrants. There's a migrant community, if you like, and their vote wouldn't count. But today, as Germans are voting, if you go to that very community, there is also voting ongoing in that community. They are also casting their ballots. The ballots will be counted, but the fact of the matter is that it will not count. It will not count in the final analysis. And I want to come to Araba on that bit. What do you make of this move by Germany? Give them a chance to vote, but then their votes wouldn't count.
Well, it's a bit complicated. I mean, I asked one or two people about it, and they said, well, if they want a voice, if they want to be represented, they can do so. So this is a way of, representing themselves. But it's quite complicated that they actually get to vote, but their vote really doesn't make a difference in the whole process. Okay. So it's complicated. I still quite don't understand it.
Okay, so we are not here alone. We came with a colleague from Nigeria, and she's also a journalist. She's going to tell me, Yemi say from Channels TV in Nigeria, and give us your own perspective. You've been here for a couple of days. What do you make of the process ahead of today?
In relation to the election campaign has been a bit understated, I think, because everyone assumes it's a foregone conclusion that Angela Merkel will get in. But what's been a very big issue is obviously immigration and integration, and the extent to which the far right is now getting a lot of support. And because within the voting process, you have that 5% hurdle for parties to actually get into parliament, and it looks like the far right
go beyond 5%.
Definitely. That's what people are saying. That's what people are saying.
And you think that poses a threat to the immigrants community in Germany?
Well, obviously, if you are an immigrant, you will be quite fearful. And we had a conversation with one of the candidates of the FDF, who actually said that, well, it's not just Germany for Germans, but they're actually fearful about some of the issues that immigrants are actually bringing to Germany. Now, it's a controversial topic, and I think in this day and age, obviously us as Africans, we're going to have our own perspectives as to how people should be assimilated within society, and also if you're a refugee trying to escape a war-torn environment,
tyranny,
you should be assisted. But there's also an issue as to how many people should be taken in. What's realistic?
So that's Yemi. She's a journalist from Channels TV in Nigeria. And from here, we are moving straight to one of the party headquarters to look at the mood ahead of 6 p.m. when the first ballots count is expected to hit the airwaves here in Germany. That's the SPD party headquarters. We are moving straight from here to the party headquarters to get the mood there ahead of the release of the first results in the 2017 German elections. Bernice?
Shortly, but that's my colleague Latif Idris coming to us live from Berlin, and he's there with Joy News editor Araba Kumsin. And as you saw, some other journalists from the continent, he just spoke to a colleague from Nigeria, sharing their thoughts on the election process there so far. And but Latif, when exactly should we expect the results?
So at 6 p.m., Venice, we expect that the results, voting actually
that's 8 p.m. local time here in Ghana.
8 p.m. local time in Ghana, exactly. At 6 p.m., polls closes here in Germany. And that would take about 2 more hours before we get to know the first official results from the various polling stations.
And how was the collation done, for example? Is it similar to what we have here in Ghana?
Very similar to what we have back home in Ghana, where at the various polling stations, the officials there will collate the result and send it to a particular center, where it is also collated once again, then sent to the national center where the results are declared.
All right. Thank you very much, Lateef Idris, for those interviews you did, and obviously the information you also shared with us. We'll be touching base later with Lateef and the team in Berlin. But you're watching our special coverage of the German elections. And also earlier, prior to today's election, my colleague Gifty Andwapia also had some conversations on this particular election, and I brought you an earlier one on the Dieselgate and the key campaign issues with DW's political correspondent Thomas Sparrow. But here's another one where he gives us some analysis on the presidential debates between the two main contenders, Angela Merkel and Martin Schulz.
Well, that was the only debate, the only televised debate between Angela Merkel and Martin Schulz. The main areas obviously included immigration. There was a big segment on immigration, but there were also other topics that were discussed. Obviously, foreign policy is a major one, social justice, or obviously the issue of security. Those were the 4 big blocks that the two leading candidates discussed on Sunday. But it's also important, Gifty, to mention that on Monday there was another debate, obviously not with Merkel and Schulz, but with the representatives of the 5 smaller parties in Germany. And that's particularly important because the 5 smaller parties in Germany could be, for example, kingmakers when it comes to negotiating future coalitions, or could also be important when it comes to determining what parties will be opposition parties in parliament. So obviously after the debate on Sunday, after the debate on Monday, the German election campaign is definitely becoming more and more important as obviously the candidates prepare for that all-important day on September 24.
Well, I cited an article online that shows how all the manifestos of these parties have at least a passage about Africa. Now, my question is how prominent the continent has been so far on the parties, all of the parties in this election's agenda going forward.
Well, and Africa, in fact, was also mentioned during the debates. It is mainly linked to migration, mainly linked to politicians' desires to fight the root causes of migration. And in that aspect, obviously, all parties are trying to present their proposals. You know, because we also spoke about this a few weeks ago, that the German government is particularly interested in strengthening cooperation with African countries, for example, when it comes to promoting investment. That's one of the key areas where the German government plans to work in Africa, and that's also been a topic that candidates have been discussing. That's also present in the party programs of the main parties here in Germany. That there is nevertheless a difference between what the parties present in these sort of areas. You have, for example, parties that would like to have not only investment, traditional investment, if you will, and development aid, but also promote private investment. There are parties that say, okay, we can have private investment as well, but that should come with trying to improve the situation for Africans in their own countries and trying to promote job creation. And then you have other extremes where they say that Germany's trade relationship with Africa is under no circumstance fair, and Germany should reorient or reorganize the way it deals with Africa when it comes to trade and when it comes to investment. So you have really a wide range of political opinions and political interests coming from the different German parties that are participating in this election.
Well, some have also said that in this regard, Africa will lose the significance that it has sort of gained with this particular election campaigns. For you, what are the dynamics of this particular school of thought?
Well, I don't think that that will be the case, again, because the topic of Africa and the topic of investment in Africa and compacts with Africa, those partnerships that we've been talking about, are in some way linked to the issue of migration, and the issue of migration is, by definition, and also something that we've seen in certain polls, what Germans believe is the biggest problem the politicians have to face here in the country. I do see that Africa will continue to be important, but that obviously depends to a certain extent what the next government and what the next parliament will look like, because in Germany you don't have a system where the winner of the election simply decides everything. In Germany you have a system where the party that wins the election then has to enter into coalition agreements or coalition negotiations with other parties, and will obviously influence the Africa policy that will come after the election. So that's why it's important to see what the different parties have in their party manifestos when it comes to Africa, and when it comes in particular to these trade relationships with Africa.
Now to my very favorite question, because I do think the politics is really all about the people. What has been the response from the German people following this live television debate?
Well, most people actually didn't think that it changed much. If you ask German people, many of them, at least many of the German people I spoke to, thought that it was a boring debate. I wouldn't describe it at all as boring. I would say it was a very civilized, fact-based debate between the two leading candidates. That was also the case with the next debate the following day among the minor parties. In fact, you had a wide range of topics that were discussed, and that was something that many people also recognized, although some people, again, were critical, for example, of the main debate, because they said there's only one debate and many important topics were left out. For example, the topic of education, for example, the topic of environment. So people obviously agree that it was important to see the candidates side by side and discuss the main topics, but many people actually didn't think that it changed much. In fact, polls after the debate agreed that maybe Angela Merkel won, although I would say it didn't help Merkel a lot, but it didn't harm her either, and it didn't help Schulz a lot. It didn't harm him either. I think it just reflects the status quo as it is at the moment.
It's on social media. It's interesting how it all goes down. The countdown is already on to the day of election. And Thomas, thank you so much for that.
So that was Thomas Sparrow with DW TV, our partners, speaking to Gifty and Bapia. Aaron Boachi Dankwa is a Ghanaian resident in Brandenburg, Germany. Now, one of the co-founders of the AfD, Alexander Goland, comes from this town. What are his thoughts on the election so far? Well, let's find out from him. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing? And how's Germany?
I'm fine, thank you. And Germany's also quite peaceful as compared to Ghana in this period of election. You can say that it's really very peaceful, very different from what we do of election period. Ghana.
And how long have you been in Germany? And is this your first election you're observing?
Yes, actually, this is my first election I'm observing. I studied here, and I'm practically living here in Brandenburg since for 2 years now. So it's not so much of experience. I'm talking about politics or talking about election periods, but I think I'm quite integrated as well to know exactly what is really going on in the system.
So apart from the peaceful nature you described the elections as, what else have you observed, or what are your thoughts on the election so far?
Okay, I can obviously only compare the elections in Germany to that of Ghana, what we know. And what I see is that actually it looks like election on a whole different level, where people are actually looking at policies and not basically the charismatic power of whoever is competing for whatever position. And so for this, you realize that there's still lots of intellectual debates going on, talking about the integration, refugee politics, talking about security measures and all policies against terrorism. I think these are issues which are quite critical, and they come on board. They are being discussed, and people take over. People take part in these dialogues because they seem to really understand the concept of politics, and it's not just based on who is going to win the next power or the next tenor of power, but it's basically who is going to give us the maximum security that we are looking for, or who is competent enough to take the country to the next level that we as a people are looking forward to. So I think there's a quite difference there. There's very little exuberance from the people, but more or less to say they think really about who is competent or which party supports the basic interests of the people.
So Aaron, how did the campaign period in Germany, for example, look like to you, comparing it to what we have in Ghana?
Okay, the campaign period in Germany is very quiet. It looks like not much effort is invested into it as in Ghana, because it looks like Ghana, the people involved feel that they have to sell themselves. Here, like I said before, it's basically all about politics. And so they try to enlighten people to understand exactly what path they are trying to propose. When you look at the sitting party now, there's the CDU, which is being headed by Angela Merkel. Obviously, this is going to be their fourth term should they win power. And so instead of campaigning so much on what they would like to do, they try to sensitize people on what they have been able to achieve so far. And then, of course, Martin Schulz, who is standing for the SPD, he is going to be new in the system. And so he's trying to propose ideas of what it could be. So you realize that it is basically a very decent debate that goes on. And it's nothing really that incites any kind of political hate or bring any kind of division. It's basically where are we as a people and where do we want to get to, and which of these parties is actually in a position to support those ideas. And so, yes, that's what I think is also quite important in the application.
All right, Aaron, I'm just curious. You've been in Germany for 2 years, is it? Do you have a vote?
No, I don't have a vote yet.
All right. Okay, you don't have a vote yet. But whose message appeals to you? I'm talking about the main contenders, Angela Merkel or Martin Schulz.
Okay, it's quite dicey because as an immigrant, I would say that I do find the policies of the CDU, that's Angela Merkel, quite attractive because they seem to attach a more liberal approach to refugee politics. And I think that to so many immigrants like myself, we find it to be okay. Unlike Schulz, who seeks more of, I would say, a radical change in the system. So obviously he is campaigning against Angela Merkel, and it looks like he tries to present what could be better, which necessarily does not seem to go well for immigrants, because that when should he gain power, it's going to be basically fighting for the interests of the Germans. He proposes pacts like trying to reduce taxes for the Germans, and obviously when that happens, you know that means very little is going to be invested into immigration or refugee interests. But then again, as a worker in Germany, I do find the SPD is also quite interesting because presently, when you look at Eastern Europe or Germany, you look at the tax rate and everything. Germany pays very high taxes, and so as a worker, you feel it that you are really stressed in the system. So I think that there, I do think that it's quite comfortable to think of someone who can make everything a bit okay for us in terms of taxes. But I think that's what most of the working class look out for, that yes, they can relieve a bit of taxes. But then again, Angela Merkel's integration of politics is something that I do find attractive as an immigrant.
All right,
but I'm the two.
Okay, Aaron, is it the same with your other colleagues, migrants like yourself, or the Ghanaian community? Do you find people more attracted to Angela Merkel's policies?
Yes, of course. I've spoken to quite a number of people, and they think that Angela Merkel is actually very good for Germany now in this period, considering the influx of immigration and everything. And particularly because most of the people I've spoken to are also not, I would say they are not so established. And so they think that a radical change, which we don't really know in which direction will go, may not necessarily favor them. So they think that, well, what they are used to now, that is the very liberal system presented by the CDU, is quite attractive. And yes, so I think most of the people won't necessarily want to change. When it comes to the immigrant community, most of them don't exactly want to change because Germany seems to be a bit peaceful now. It seems to be a bit accommodating, and integration is something that Angela Merkel always hammers on. It's a part of her policy.
Finally, Aaron, would you be surprised at the end of the day if the results do not go according to polls so far? I mean, what the pollsters have put together?
I will not necessarily be so surprised because the whole system here is quite different. It's really hard to predict in any direction. I mean, it's very hard to predict whichever direction is going. Like I said, campaign and everything is not like in Ghana where the voices of the masses are actually heard. You can actually judge just from word of mouth. That's okay. Most people think that this person is the right candidate or this person is not. It's all based on some kind of intellectual analysis, and what people really think, you can't be too sure. For someone like myself, like as I said, I am torn between the SPD and the CDU because of the worker. I do think that the SPD do have quite attractive policies planned, but then the CDU also supports migration and everything. So I think that individually, people look at where their interest lies and what really will serve them better, considering the socioeconomic development of the country, whichever direction it should go. So it's really hard to tell. It's very hard to tell which way it will go, and I think I'll be surprised.
All right, Aaron, but you live in Brandenburg, and that's the hometown of one of the founders of the AfD, which is quite a liberal party. Exactly. What are people generally in Brandenburg saying?
It's very quiet. It's very quiet here. They rarely talk about politics in groups or in the community like we do in Ghana. So I think they attach more of a very personal, private thing to their political life here. So it makes it very difficult, and especially as an immigrant in a very white community, it's very difficult to really know what the people think when it comes to their choice of politics, because you do even have a one-on-one conversation with people. As approaching an immigrant, sometimes they may think, okay, let me just say something that would make him feel that we support good systems which protect immigrants, which may not necessarily reflect their true, what would I say, their interest or what they'd practically be voting for, but they would all come out very nice and supportive. So it's very difficult to say that it's going in this particular direction just because Brandenburg is actually a very solid state where most of the political figures actually come from. It's tough.
And let's still stay on the AfD, because one of the founders is actually lesbian. And we know that Germany is believed to be predominantly a Christian nation. And quite recently, they had to vote in parliament whether or not to approve lesbian or gay marriages. What has all this, I mean, how has all this played in the elections and the campaign messages generally?
Okay, I think that for issues such as the social rights and, I mean, like the approval of the gay marriages and everything, it doesn't seem to have so much effect on the elections. I mean, the tenor of how the elections is going, I can say, because I'm just basing this on the whole aura from the time of the approval of these decisions in court. Germans actually stand for freedom. I would say they are quite liberal when it comes to rights. And so anything that has to do with rights of humans, irrespective of whatever their individual opinions are, I think they reserve a more, what would I say, they are not so strong to opposing such ideas. And I think that that is not necessarily playing a very critical role in this campaign or in this election. But what definitely won't go off the table are discussions like the integration politics, security, and then measures against terrorism, which seems to be something that everyone is quite critical about. And then, of course, the general economic development policies that are being introduced for the country. So I think that rights such as rights seem to be quite secondary to the average German.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Boache Dankwa is a Ghanaian living in Brandenburg. and he's been speaking to us, telling us his thoughts on the election process. He's tried to compare that to what we have here in Ghana, and also whether or not he'll be surprised if the election results do not tally with pre-election polls. We'll take a quick breather here. Hopefully, Aaron will speak to you when the results start trickling in. You're watching a special coverage of the German elections. We'll take a quick breather. We'll be back in a moment for social media comments. Thanks so much for staying here on Joe News. This is our special coverage of the German elections, and a lot of you have been commenting on our live streaming on Facebook. Just pick up a few of your comments there. Nana Kwame Edu-Jemfi says, well, he thinks it's a win for Merkel, although he wishes for Schulz, but Merkel leads by a very wide margin. And Faustina Ebwachi says, I'm wishing my friend, Mr. Volkmar Klein, success in his parliamentary election in Segeland. And Salifu Yaya Anazun says, Merkel is a revolutionist in women's political history, well, of our generation. Mensa Joel says Chancellor Angela will win, and Oheneba thinks most likely Merkel will win. Well, that's what the polls are saying. And Joyce Enyonam Gavo says Angela Merkel. David Enelson says, well, Merkel will win. Francis Zafari says Merkel. Lamik Freeman says Merkel. Chief Na says Merkel, and everybody seems to be going on for her. Gershon Saki thinks also that Angela Merkel will win, and Apin Panta Georgina says Merkel will carry the day. But quite recently we've learned not to trust so much what the polls tell us, or pre-election posters gather, because it can be tricky sometimes. So those were some of your Facebook comments, and quickly we'll take some of your WhatsApp comments. And this one says, I'm here in my living room watching your broadcast of the German elections. It's impressive that you have a correspondent in Germany to inform us here in Sunyani on what is going on there. That's from Matthew Tremi in Sunyani. All right, this one says they're still in Germany this time. We are linking with all right, okay, so this is actually not a message, but we'll take you live to Germany, and we are linking with Ali Drexler. She's an American working in the German parliament, that's the Bundestag. Now, she actually works with one of the members of parliament contesting to be re-elected. Hello, Ali.
Oh.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Good to be here today.
All right. Good to hear from you too. So, well, what is your impression so far on voter turnout, if you know of it?
It's been looking really good so far. Surprisingly, a lot of people have already voted in the pre-election, so they sent in their votes as a letter instead of going here on election day. But so far, there seems to be long lines at all of the polling stations, and people seem to be coming out for the election despite the cloudy gray weather here we have in Berlin.
All right, so we know that you work in Germany's parliament and work with one of the representatives who is actually hoping to be re-elected. Can you just tell us briefly about who he is and where he represents in Bundestag?
I work for a member of parliament, a woman actually, who's from Bayern, so the southern region of Germany. And I can't give too many details exactly what she does, but she works in the Ministry for Transportation and Digital Infrastructure. So her big focuses are on improving the infrastructure here in Germany and really bringing the digital age here. But her chances of getting reelected are very strong, and she looks very much forward to working the next 4 years in the Bundestag.
And which party does she represent?
The Christian Democrats, Merkel's party.
All right, okay. And we know that, for example, the pollsters have pitched Merkel to win this particular one. And but you work on the ground. As at the time, we even know that quite a lot of people were not sure of who they were going to vote for. Are you as confident as the polls suggest?
I think it's not a big question of Merkel winning or not. Her chances are very high that her party will get the highest votes. I don't think we should worry about that. I think the polls are pretty accurate that her party will win. But what's really exciting and what is really going to be up in the air is the opposition parties. So which of the parties from the far right and the far left and then the Greens are going to get the votes? Who is what's the rest of the votes going to turn out to look like? Because even though Merkel's party will most likely get the most votes, the parties below her, we have no idea what they're going to look like and how many votes they're going to get.
Ali, you're an American, and we just want to do a brief comparative analysis with what you have with the American system and what you've experienced in Germany. What can you share, similarities, differences?
I think there's a lot of similarities here in Germany. The people are very unhappy with the current government that they've had. There's been a lot of conflict and drama in the past couple of years with economics and finances and the refugee crisis. So people are very unhappy with the status quo, which includes Merkel's party and the Social Democrats. And I think a lot of that was happening in the US as well, where people were really tired of the status quo and tired of what we've had in the government for many years to come. And you see a lot of that discontent here in Germany, and that's what is showing in the polls right now. Whereas even though Merkel's party will most likely win, a lot of people are gravitating away from Merkel's party, away from the Social Democrats, into the opposition parties.
And well, what would you say in terms of the campaign periods and how probably it's related to what you have with the American system?
Yeah, the campaign period here is much shorter than in the US. The US campaigns go on for almost 2 years, and here we really started picking up the campaigning 3 months before the election. So around June, July time period was when the election campaigning really started. And then this last month has been kind of the last stretch where people have really been hitting the streets and knocking on doors and trying to get those last votes. But it's much shorter than the US and much less commercial than in the US here in Germany. That people are really doing this all by volunteering. There's much less involvement from the large corporations donating large sums of money. I find it much more democratic, and they really are showing kind of what it means to participate in an election here.
It was quite an interesting election in America, in France, obviously with Brexit. Do you think that all of this, what's playing up in world politics, would have an effect on the election today in Germany?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole world has their eyes on Germany right now, and Germany has been watching the whole world for the past year, trying to figure out what's going on with European politics. And Germany is typically seen as a much more stable partner, but you can see in the elections that this far-right party, the Alternative for Germany, has really gained in the poll numbers. Today, they've risen up of multiple percentage points. And I think that's a result of the changes that we've seen in Europe in the politics, is that there's far-right parties that are really gaining ground. And I think they've been watching around the world and seeing that happen and trying to kind of mimic that here in Germany.
So what's the general mood? We know that Angela Merkel, for example, has spoken about the banter between North Korea's president and your president, Donald Trump, and how all of that plays into world politics and what she thinks Germany can do as a mediator in that. How are people generally reacting to some of these world issues and how they play into the German political system?
I think the Germans are reacting with a bit of skepticism, but they're ready to take some initiative. I've spoken to a lot of not only friends, but just in the Bundestag, in the parliament, that they're willing to kind of take on this responsibility as the US and the other world leaders are making other decisions going in directions that they may not agree with. Germany is ready to take on some of that responsibility and maybe take part in negotiations more than they have in the past to prevent, some of the things that many people are worried about, such as another war or nuclear disasters or anything. I think Germany's really willing to kind of take a step up than what they have in the past.
Ali, I mean, all over the world, women are trying. Some of them have really done well in political capacities and even staying on the front line in terms of politics in their countries. But Angela Merkel seems to be one very strong one, and she actually is an icon for many women in politics. I can see that smile on your face. Let's talk a bit about the dynamics of women in Bundestag, for example, in your parliament, and also what she represents, Angela Merkel, as a politician for women in Germany.
Absolutely. I think Merkel really shows that you can be a strong politician and be a strong woman as well. And I think also she doesn't necessarily try to oversell the fact that she's a woman. She's not constantly saying, I'm a woman and I'm the chancellor. She's saying, I am the chancellor here and I am the leader. And I think that shows a lot of respect where she represents women very strongly and a lot of women look up to her. But it's not that she's trying to make a special example out of herself. She leads by example and then people follow her. But there is a big problem in the German parliament, just like around the world, as you mentioned, that there's not enough women in the leadership positions. Even though we have Merkel as the chancellor here in Germany, there's still a lot of, it's still not equal in the parliament itself. There's many more men that have position than women. And Merkel's really going to try and change that. She's pledged that she wants at least 50% women in the ministry positions here in Germany and that she wants more women to take part in the election. As I said, my representative is actually a woman as well, and she also has this same pledge to make sure that more women take part in the elections and more women are trying to get in those leadership roles. But really, it starts at the bottom and they have to kind of work their way up. It's not easy to kind of go back of years and years of tradition to really take over the parliament in that way.
How has it been like in terms of numbers, if you can share any, since she became Chancellor, Angela Merkel, some 12 years ago, and now she's going for a fourth time. Hopefully she would win. And what is it like? Have the numbers increased for women, or it's really been static or declined?
So when she first came into parliament, the numbers were quite low. In her first 2 terms, the numbers rose slightly, not considerably, but there definitely was an increase. And then this past election, it stayed the same. But for this year's election, unfortunately, the numbers have actually gone down. So the number of women running for parliament positions here in Germany has actually gone down for this election compared to the election in 2013. And there's not really a lot of explanation as to why that is. I don't necessarily think you can blame Merkel for that, or I don't know who you can blame, but it is true that there are less women running for parliamentary positions in this election than in the last one.
You've been here in Ghana. You worked with the IEA. Can you briefly share with us what you think the political atmosphere is compared to what you have in Germany as you're experiencing it now?
Comparing that, I wasn't there. I was there a year before there was an election in Ghana, so I didn't get to see kind of firsthand what the election is like in Ghana, but I of course followed it from here. And I think that Ghana shows a lot of similarities and is definitely a growing and a strong democracy in Africa. And I think there's a lot of similarities between the parties as well. You have a center-right and a center-left, just like here in Germany, we have the center-right and center-left. And so really trying to fight between the differences between these parties can sometimes be difficult when you have 2 leading parties that are close to the center. And I think also, when you look at the leaders in Ghana of the 2 parties, those are all play a huge role in who people choose. You look to the incumbent Mahama from the last election, and you're looking at the incumbent Merkel here, and people might think that that's stability, but also they want something new. And so I think the same sentiment here is that, if I remember correctly, that Mahama is no longer the president. They chose to represent, the people chose to choose the opposition party. And so we're seeing again here this move toward, okay, we don't want the incumbent to stay. We want something new. We want to change in the government and to see some new initiatives from that.
Interesting. Ali Drexler, thank you so much for your time here with us. Ali Drexler is in Germany, actually works in the parliament there, referred to as Bundestag. We wish your candidate all the best. Hopefully we'll speak when the results trickle in and see if she was re-elected. But thank you so much for your time here with us. And that'll be it for my session here with you on a special coverage of the German elections. Daniel Dazi will be here shortly. But before he comes, here's Alexander Golan, co-founder of the AfD.
Alexander Gauland is the lead candidate of the Alternative for Germany Party, or AfD. Welcome to DW.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is one of the world's most popular politicians. You left Merkel's Christian Democratic Party in 2013. Tell us why.
Because Merkel's party was no longer the party that I had joined. The Christian Democrats no longer had substance. They had abandoned their core positions. The last of the true conservatives left the party. I don't want to accuse anyone in particular, but the deciding factors for me were the Christian Democrats' Euro rescue package and their energy transition policy. Konrad Aden, Bernd Lucke, Frauke Petry and I decided that we had to do something. And that's how the AfD was born.
Mr. Gauland, the policies that you've just mentioned are nowhere to be found in your party's platform. The focus is on refugee policy. Surely Germany has other problems to deal with?
That's not correct. Our platform includes a full range of topics, like tax policy.
The focus is refugee policy.
But not only that. Refugee policy, the Euro bailout, Islam, direct democracy. I was in the CDU for 40 years, and I never once read a party election platform paper. People aren't interested in that. What people want is a party that will take a stand on specific issues that concern them, and that includes refugee policy, Islam and direct democracy. Those are the issues that we must focus on.
As far as refugee policy is concerned, your platform says that Germany's borders must be closed immediately.
Correct.
How would that work?
We would implement the plans that were already on the table, as drafted by the Federal Police and the Bavarian Police. No one would be allowed to cross the border unless they had the proper documentation. It's as simple as that.
So in concrete terms, if there's a refugee waiting at the border, he or she won't be allowed to enter Germany.
They shouldn't be allowed in.
And if there are crowds of people on the border?
These people shouldn't even be allowed into the country. They should be in asylum centers outside Germany, even outside Europe, where they can apply for asylum if they really qualify.
That means everyone.
Everyone, no exceptions.
Mr. Gauland, several parties agree that we have to find solutions in the countries of origin that would prevent these people from making this hazardous journey to Europe, by crossing the Mediterranean, for example. But we still have to deal with the situation as it stands. Every day, refugees arrive in European countries like Italy. What would you do if your party were in government? Say a boat full of refugees arrives in Lampedusa. Tell us what you would do and give us some specifics.
The people would have to be brought back by sea to the country they came from. You're absolutely right. We can't let Italy deal with this situation all by itself. Europe's external borders must be closed. EU states have navies, and those ships must be used to make sure that people don't come to Europe from Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, or wherever.
You say that you'd send these people back. Would you really return them to, say, Libya?
Of course. They went there voluntarily.
Voluntarily?
No one forced them to go there. It's all voluntary. Nobody's forcing them to come from southern Africa to or through Libya. So anybody who comes through Libya of their own accord can also be sent back there.
Let's define voluntarily. Is it someone who's doing well and just decides to come to Europe?
It means that they're not being politically persecuted. They're just looking for a better life in Europe. Europe is not obligated to provide a better life for refugees.
I'd like to follow up on the concept of voluntarily. It's an interesting line of thought. People who are fleeing war zones don't come voluntarily to Germany or other parts of Europe.
Okay, slow down. The Geneva Convention provides a limited right of residence to people who are fleeing war zones. They are not to become integrated in their new country. They are to be returned to their country of origin as soon as the conflict is over. But most of the people we're dealing with are economic migrants. They're not fleeing a war zone. They just want to have a better life. For example, people are coming to Europe from a wealthy country like Nigeria. That's where they have to build their future. We're not obligated to provide African elites.
But, Mr. Gauland, you left East Germany.
I wasn't a refugee.
To have a better life. It's legitimate, isn't it? You can certainly understand why others would want to do the same.
First of all, I was a German living in Germany. I didn't come to West Germany because I wanted a better life. I left East Germany because I was not allowed to study there. That's a big difference.
But your life improved. You could study here in the West.
I wasn't allowed to study in East Germany. Of course, it's natural for people to want a better life, but it's also perfectly legitimate for a state to say, we are not obligated to let you stay here.
But let's continue with Libya. Are you familiar with the situation in that country?
Never been there, but I read about it in the papers. But that's not the problem.
And what's in the papers?
People in Libya are not being treated particularly well.
Particularly well?
I can't give you any specific details, obviously.
But if you can't, why would you say that people should be sent back there?
They voluntarily decided to travel through Libya, so it's reasonable to assume that they should be sent back there. We take in people who don't have proper documents, and then we can't send them back because they don't have proper documents. Libya must guarantee the full range of human rights? Really? Like this, we'll never get the situation under control.
Does that also apply to Syria? You said that almost all, indeed all, people who come here are economic migrants. Does that include Syrian refugees?
Syria is a different situation, and I wouldn't make such a general statement. We read about the Syrian civil war every day in the papers. And of course, people who are fleeing a civil war have a limited right of residence, as outlined in the Geneva Convention. That situation is completely different from that of people who come from sub-Saharan Africa for purely economic reasons. We have laws on asylum, and people can claim asylum here under the provisions of the Geneva Convention. That's two different things.
I'd like to move on to some other topics. But before we do that, I'd like to address something that you've said often in your election campaign. The refugee crisis is a blessing.
I've never said that.
I heard it on Deutschlandradio.
The Chancellor's mistaken policy on refugees is a blessing for the AfD.
You said that the refugee crisis is a blessing. DW is an international broadcaster. How do statements like this affect Germany's image?
They portray Germany as a country that stands up for its own interests. Germany should not be the world's doormat. So I'm not sure that this is a negative image. President Trump says America first. Theresa May says the same about Britain. Many other European states also believe that, even if they're not so specific. We say Germany first. That doesn't mean Germany above all else. It certainly doesn't mean that we want to make a stand against other countries. We have to take our own interests into account, and taking in masses of refugees is not in the interests of Germany.
You mentioned President Trump. One of his most popular campaign slogans was America First. What were your thoughts when you heard the news about Charlottesville?
I was campaigning at the time, so I didn't see the TV coverage. Such attacks are wrong. And of course, murder or attempted murder is never acceptable. It's criminal behavior. What are my thoughts? It's wrong. In the US, in Germany, or in any other state.
In Charlottesville, white right-wing extremists shouted racist and anti-Semitic slogans. If a country moves to strengthen its national identity, won't that empower groups like this?
I wouldn't make any comparisons. The circumstances in the run-up to the election of Donald Trump were completely different from the situation in Germany. Trump was elected because the white lower class believed that the Obama administration had sold them short on jobs and social programs. The situation in Germany is simply not the same, so I don't think you can draw a parallel between Trump's election and why we might be elected, or Marine Le Pen in France. These comparisons just don't work. Trump's election is a matter of American domestic policy. The Americans decide who they want as president, and the French do the same. I've always said that.
The French decided that they didn't want Le Pen. But let's get back to Germany, and a topic that comes up often in your election campaign, Islam. I have a Muslim cultural background. Am I a part of Germany?
I assume that you have German citizenship. That means you are part of Germany. It doesn't matter to me whether you have a Muslim background. You can practice your religion here. That's not the focus of our criticism. We say that Islam in its current form does not belong in Germany.
What do you mean, current form?
I'd like to remind you that Mr. Khomeini once said that Islam is either political or it isn't. And when it is political...
You repeat that quote quite often. I suspected that you were going to use it today, and now you have. He was talking about Islam in Iran. We're talking about Muslims in Germany. There are 5 million of them. What bothers you about German Muslims? Let's talk about that.
Lassen Sie uns bitte über Deutschland sprechen, Muslime in Deutschland.
I have a problem with Sharia law and certain other aspects of Islam that are not compatible with the German constitution. Muslims who, in private...
But most of the Muslims in Germany live here peacefully and abide by the German basic law.
I have my doubts.
Most German Muslims live here peacefully, with a few exceptions. Have you got different numbers?
Yes.
Give me some specifics.
Just under 70% of the Turks in Germany voted for President Erdogan. That doesn't speak well for integration, and a study says that 40% of German Muslims believe that religious law is more important than state law. And about a 33 or 32% said that if they could, they would want to live in the earliest age of Islam, when it was founded by Muhammad. That doesn't sound like proper integration to me.
I'm familiar with that study, but the fact remains that most German Muslims live here peacefully and abide by the German basic law. So why do you make general statements about Islam? Why not differentiate? Your party platform is Islam is not part of Germany, period.
Correct. Islam as a cultural and religious entity has no place in Germany.
What about the 5 million German Muslims?
Those who practice their faith in private are protected by our basic law. But we can't allow the introduction of Sharia law here in Germany. Here's another example.
Where has that happened?
In Cottbus, a Chechen man who suspected his wife of being unfaithful stabbed her repeatedly, threw her out of a window, and then slit her throat. But he wasn't convicted of murder. And this on cultural grounds.
But you know very well that this verdict will be appealed in accordance with the basic law.
But this case shows how much influence Islam has here.
I'd like to return to a previous topic and go into a little more detail. About 5 million Muslims live in Germany. You've said that you've no problem with German Muslims who practice their religion in private. I'd like to expand on that, if you wouldn't mind. In your opinion, which Muslims do have a right to live in Germany?
You can't make distinctions like that. I have no problem with German Muslims who practice their religion in private, and neither does our party. But we will not accept the gradual introduction of Muslim law.
But where is that happening? You're always talking about this, but when was the last time that you discussed this situation with Muslims?
Why should I?
They're citizens.
Excuse me, but I've already given you one example. There are others. My party and I do not want to see this country change in this regard, so that Muslims become a cultural force here. That is not compatible with the basic law or with European or Western values.
I'd like to move on to foreign policy in just a minute. That's a major topic for Germany and for your party. But first, you spend a lot of time talking about Muslims. Why won't you meet some of them and talk to them?
As far as one's private life is concerned, you spend your time with people who you meet by chance in your life, mostly from your college days. Frau Petri tried to meet with members of the Muslim community, and it wasn't a great success. I have no desire to pursue the matter any further.
No desire to discuss political beliefs with Muslims?
I have no need to talk to Muslims in any official capacity. But if I have somebody at hand, then of course I'm ready to talk to them. That's not a problem.
But as we've said, you talk a lot about Muslims, but you have no desire to talk to them. Why don't you meet a few of them and speak with them? Maybe it will give you new insights.
We've already discussed that. Our attempts at making official contact didn't work out very well.
One meeting with the Central Council.
The Muslims' official representatives have sharply criticized our party, so I have no desire to try to set them straight. Sorry.
Mr. Garland, we said earlier that foreign policy is a key element of your party's platform. Germany is now facing a number of new foreign policy challenges, perhaps because of our increasingly important role in the EU, and certainly because of our political and economic stability. Let's talk about Turkey, including the refugee agreement between Turkey and the EU. First, I'd like to ask you about relations between Turkey and NATO.
Turkey is a NATO member. NATO has never been an exclusive alliance of only democratic or semi-democratic states. Greece remained in NATO even when the junta was in power in the late 1960s and early 70s. NATO also worked with Spain when Franco was in power. I think Turkey's membership of NATO is something we should preserve if we can, provided Erdogan refrains from neo-Ottoman policies. During the Cold War, Turkey was always a sentry, and I see no reason to exclude it from the alliance.
Not everyone in your party would agree with your opinion. Some prominent party officials have said that Turkey should be tossed out at once, and that all financial transactions that are linked to bilateral and multilateral agreements should be ended. Is this just an internal party squabble?
That refers specifically to the EU. I am opposed to Turkey joining the EU, and I think that all payments in that sector should be cut off. But NATO is a military alliance. The question is whether Turkey's continued membership in NATO will enhance Germany's security. As long as Erdogan and Turkey fulfill their NATO obligations, I see no reason to exclude them. As far as a party squabble is concerned, of course we're going to have discussions about this topic and others. That's just part of the give and take of politics.
So who's really leading the AfD right now? Who's in charge?
The party conference is responsible for policy. At a recent conference, we discussed the issue of NATO, and somebody proposed a motion that called on Germany to leave NATO. I made some brief remarks and said that this would be a bad idea. I said that Bismarck himself would want Germany to stay in NATO. To a certain extent, I am responsible for foreign affairs. But an anarchistic party doesn't have a real boss. That's what we are.
Moving on to Russia, the AfD party platform favors an end to sanctions against Russia and an increase in economic cooperation between Germany and Russia. Could you talk about that in greater detail?
The sanctions